Is India still suffering a colonial hangover? Why was King George V's statue at the Central Vista till 1968, more than 2 decades after independence? Has Prime Minister Narendra Modi embarked on a bigger mission to reclaim India's rich civilizational heritage? And does that happen only by renaming Rajpath as Kartavya Path, or is there something much bigger that is happening right now? The talk of a Divya Bhavya Ram Mandir at Ayodhya, the Kashi Corridor, the Kedarnath Dham, the Mahakal Lok at Ujjain. Is this agenda political or is it civilizational? To take this forward, joining me on this special, Sai Deepak. He's an author and lawyer. Sai, please join us on stage. Professor A.G.K. Menon, architect and conservationist. Professor Menon, please join us on stage, sir. And of course, Sanjay Nirupam, former member of Parliament of the Congress Party. Sir, swagat hai aapka manch par. Sai, let's begin by talking about the Central Vista project. Just by renaming Rajpath as Kartavya Path, is this decolonization that we're talking about, or is there something much deeper that's happening right now in our country?
So I think, first of all, thank you for choosing this particular topic. I think it's extremely relevant. Perhaps prasangik is the word that it translates to as far as Hindi is concerned. I think there are two things that must be considered when you're looking at the Central Vista project. One is, of course, changing the hard infrastructure, and the second is the soft infrastructure. Both of them, according to me, go hand in hand. It's not just enough to simply change the look and feel of the particular place, but naming has a certain value. So, of course, contrary to popular perception that naming is essentially merely a symbolic or optical activity, I believe it has a deeper resonance. And that is, of course, one of the beliefs as far as Hindu philosophy itself is concerned. But the larger message that I think is being sent, or at least is sought to be sent, is that perhaps Bharat is moving away from its colonial vestiges and is trying to reinvent itself on its own terms, using its own, let's say, philosophy. And therefore, if you're looking at merely independence from a political perspective, it translates to Swarajya. But applying your own principles and value systems to the manner in which you govern yourself and the manner in which you operate, it translates to Swatantra. So in that particular sense, I think you are actually moving in that particular direction.
Professor Menon, are we moving in the direction of decolonizing our mind? Because on the Central Vista project, you saw it as a surgical strike happening on Delhi or on the people of this country.
Yes. You see, there's no doubt of the fact that we have to move on. We have left colonialism behind. We have to go forward. The question is how? How do we go forward? Do we do that by, as you mentioned, surgical strikes? Or do we do it by a certain evolution where we keep the past and move forward? We don't excise the past. We build on it. We develop it. And we root our future in the past. So there is a matter of perception. So I would put it this way, that it was not a surgical strike, not shall we say, a strategic masterstroke, but it was sort of a post-colonial self-goal. We have sort of forgotten the fact that we are a civilization, a long civilization, and we have to move on, keeping all that, the good and the bad of the past, and move forward.
Sanjay Nirupam ji, 1968 तक, 1947 में स्वतंत्रता मिली, 1968 तक किंग जॉर्ज पंचम की मूर्ति सेंट्रल विस्टा में थी. तो क्या वो मानसिक दास्ता लगातार रही है हम लोगों के मन में कि 2022 में जाके राजपथ का नाम कर्तव्य पथ किया गया?
देखिए, ऐसा है, आज हम एक ऐसे एज में जी रहे हैं जब एक इंडियन ओरिजिन का व्यक्ति इंग्लैंड का प्राइम मिनिस्टर बन रहा है, ऋषि सुनक. हम एक ऐसे एज में जी रहे हैं जब पतंजलि ने मेरे ख्याल से 2500-3000 साल पहले जिन योग सूत्रों को लिखा, बनाया, वो पूरी दुनिया योग में रंगी हुई है। ऐसे समय में डीकोलोनाइजेशन जैसा कोई कॉन्सेप्ट मतलब ही नहीं रखता। कहते हैं कि वर्ल्ड इज ए ग्लोबल विलेज। तो अब जब ग्लोबलाइजेशन के इस दौर में जैसे ही अब डीकोलोनाइजेशन की बात करते हैं, डीकोलोनियलिटी की बात करते हैं, मुझे लगता है कि हम थोड़ा रिग्रेसिव हो रहे हैं। ऑनरेबल प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने रेड फोर्ट से अपने भाषण में कहा कि जो क्या बोलते हैं कि कॉलोनाइजेशन की जो एक माइंडसेट से बाहर निकलना चाहिए। ये सच है, ये हिंदुस्तान के इतिहास का हिस्सा है कि हम वर्षों तक कॉलोनाइज थे। इस बात से इनकार कोई नहीं कर सकता, इसको कोई मिटा भी नहीं सकता। आप राजपथ को कर्तव्य पथ कर दीजिए, औरंगजेब का जो नाम है रोड के ऊपर, रोड औरंगजेब का नाम बदल दीजिए। कोई औरंगजेब का समर्थक नहीं है, लेकिन औरंगजेब का पन्ना आप इतिहास से नहीं निकाल सकते। दैट्स अ पार्ट ऑफ योर हेरिटेज, दैट्स अ पार्ट ऑफ योर हिस्ट्री। मैं क्या कहना चाह रहा हूं, मैं ये कहना चाह रहा हूं कि अब एक रोड का नाम बदलने से कुछ नहीं होगा। आप नया भारत बनाना चाहते हैं, बिल्कुल बनाइए, हम आपके साथ खड़े हैं, लेकिन नए रोड बनाइए ना। बुंदेलखंड में एक रोड बनता है, आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी उसका उद्घाटन करते हैं, हफ्ते 10 दिन के अंदर पूरा रोड ही बह जाता है बारिश में। आप साहब एक मोरबी पुल क्या था, 140 साल पुराना पुल है, अंग्रेजों के जमाने में बनाया था, वहां के मोरबी के जो राजा थे। यूरोपियन टेक्नोलॉजी का इस्तेमाल हुआ था। 7 महीने पहले बंद होता है, उसका रिपेयरिंग होती है। तो जो अंग्रेजों के जमाने में बनाया हुआ पुल था, कभी नहीं गिरा। 7 महीने में जो रिपेयरिंग होती है वो पुल गिर जाता है। अभी एक वंदे भारत ट्रेन चली है, आज तक कभी आपने सुना कि ट्रेन मवेशी से टकरा, ट्रेन टूट गई? 4 बार टूट चुका है ट्रेन। मेरा कहना, मैं गवर्नमेंट का क्रिटिसिज्म सिर्फ क्रिटिसिज्म के लिए नहीं कर रहा हूं, मैं कह रहा हूं हिंदुस्तान में डेवलपमेंट का काम होना चाहिए, प्रोग्रेसिव अप्रोच लेके चलिए।
नहीं तो जब एक नई संसद बनती है
जी,
एक संसद का नया भवन बन रहा है अगर नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस की मूर्ति लगती है या एक राष्ट्रीय समर स्मारक बनता है, आप ये सोचिए कि 1947 से हम युद्ध लड़ रहे हैं, 1947 से हमारी वीरता आ रही है, लेकिन इंडिया गेट ही बना रहा। आपने एक अपना राष्ट्रीय समर स्मारक नहीं बनाया। तो क्या ये दास्ता थी साई, या हम लोग बस पुराना काट के
मैं
नया
जोड़ता
नाम
हूं
दे
एक
रहे हैं?
चीज, दीपक साहब एक चीज जोड़ देता हूं मैं। देखो, ये जो कॉलोनियलिज्म के माइंडसेट से हम जब बाहर निकलना शुरू किए थे ना, वो तो बहुत पहले शुरू हो गया था। 1929 में जब पूर्ण स्वराज्य की घोषणा की गई थी, तो किसने घोषणा की थी? पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू ने, जिसकी बैशिंग आज होती रहती है। और किसने विरोध किया था उसका? स्वयं महात्मा गांधी जी ने विरोध किया था। इसके ऊपर नेहरू जी के पिताजी मोतीलाल नेहरू ने कहा कि नहीं, डोमिनियन स्टेटस में ही रहेंगे हम। डोमिनियन स्टेटस मतलब क्या? जो आज ऑस्ट्रेलिया और न्यूजीलैंड का हाल है। यानी तब नेहरू जी ने कहा कि हमको इस दास्ता की मानसिकता से बाहर निकलना पड़ेगा, हिंदुस्तान की अपनी पहचान बनानी पड़ेगी, और उसके लिए उन्होंने 1930 में 26 जनवरी को तिरंगा लहराया, और वही 26 जनवरी बाद में रिपब्लिक डे बनता है। माय पॉइंट इज कॉलोनियलिज्म के खिलाफ उस माइंडसेट के खिलाफ निकलने का जो प्रक्रिया है वो बहुत लंबी है, बहुत दिनों से चल रही है।
नहीं, लेकिन
लेकिन
1930 में शुरू
गिरा
हुई।
देंगे।
ठीक, साई आपको उत्तर देना चाहते हैं। साई,
See, there are two aspects. जब भी colonial, whenever you speak of decolonization or when you speak of decoloniality, the unfortunate problem is the conversation somehow is immediately muddled with development, as if decolonization from a mental perspective and a cultural perspective is somehow at loggerheads with our developmental goals. A society which fundamentally lacks self-confidence with respect to its own roots, even if it succeeds, is going to succeed on the basis of the rules which are established by the West. Itna globalization hua hai, but the fact of the matter is, identity still remains relevant. When it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to the global stage today, the West is very, very clear that it is seeing a certain assault on its own values. And just as Russia believes that it is effectively repelling Western colonialism, therefore, notwithstanding these platitudes with respect to globalization, the fact remains that roots, origins, and culture and identity still matter. That's point number one. Point number two. We need not think that when it comes to culture, it somehow is at loggerheads with development, or development is at loggerheads with culture. Both of them go hand in hand. I'll give you a simple example. Just as us, around the same time, Israel became independent on the 16th of May 1948. And that particular state also inherited certain institutions, just as India did from the British colonizer. However, as soon as it gained independence, political independence, they started speaking of introduction and revival of Hebrew as a language as far as their education system is concerned. They managed to revive a dead language. Bharat still does not have the confidence to speak of Sanskrit. Bharat still thinks that Sanskrit happens to be, it revolves around the politics of that particular language. We don't even have the confidence to revive our own languages because we believe that it's a dead language.
एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग एस्पेक्ट आपने रेज किया है संजय निरुपम जी. भाषा पर भी हम चर्चा करेंगे, लेकिन उससे पहले डू वी टेक मोर प्राइड इन इंग्लिश देन हिंदी? डू वी थिंक अरे वो तो संस्कृत बोलता है, उसको हम क्या समझेंगे? तो क्या ये भी मानसिक दास्ता है हम लोगों की? बट बिफोर दैट आई वांट टू वंस अगेन कम बैक ऑन द इशू ऑफ सेंट्रल विस्टा. 2013, there was an effort that Lutyens Bungalow Zone or New Delhi should be declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Is that same mansik dasta that we speak of? Or is that something that's a part of our culture and we need to move with it? Professor Menon, your take first.
Well, I think in the profession I've been in, conservation, I find that on the one hand, we are very proud of our past. On the other hand, we do a lot of injustice to our past in practice. I talk as an urban planner, I talk as a conservationist, and I find that we are not able to visualize a future which includes the past, which means that we are not able to respect the past. And that was because the colonials taught us not to respect the past, but only the future, which was introduced by them. And today in 2022, when we do, whether it's a Vishwanath Dham project, or whether it is the Central Vista, we look elsewhere for inspirations to make the new. We don't try and develop it from what existed. So Vishwanath Dham project, for example, I'm just horrified at the fact that here's a historic city, we raise 80 acres of it and build a mall and say we have done something fantastic. We have preserved the park. We have preserved Vishwanath Dham. The temple is still there, but everything else around it has been destroyed. So as a conservationist, as an urban planner, I'm saying, what are we doing?
No, what is chaos? Is chaos? मतलब अगर हम एक दिव्य भव्य मंदिर की सोचें, एक दिव्य भव्य मंदिर की कल्पना करें, is that better, or a chaotic street where, getting to that dham itself is an absolute nightmare? Is that, Sai Deepak, is that the crisis that we are talking about? Recently I was in Kedarnath covering the Prime Minister's visit, and is that slavish mentality? Did we have that slavish mentality कि हम अपने धामों को develop ही नहीं करेंगे?
No, there are three issues that you have to seriously consider now. I think it becomes very, very crucial. We are being told that after independence, there is no need to discuss decolonization further. The job is done and dusted. Try addressing the Supreme Court of this country in an Indian language, even Hindi for that matter, and not any other Indian language for that matter, as opposed to English. I'm sure you know that a couple of years ago, one of the judges of the Supreme Court effectively shot down a particular submission that was being made in Hindi, saying this is the Supreme Court of India and the only language that is acceptable in this particular forum happens to be English. Now you please tell me, अगर ये मानसिक दास्ता को नहीं दर्शाता है, तो क्या दर्शाता है? Second, I don't know how many people have visited the Golden Temple. In 2013 and 14, the situation was very different in terms of the approach road, and subsequently there is a vast difference in terms of the approach road. So when beautification of the Harmandir Sahib was undertaken, we did not have these conversations as if culture, past and development are at loggerheads with each other. That conversation seems to happen only when it comes to Kashi Vishwanath. To preserve the sanctity of that particular place does not mean that you allow it to constantly be steeped in the past, so much so that it is not even amenable to any kind of pedestrian approach. You're not even able to walk to that particular place with a certain degree of comfort. I don't think we need to be able to reduce the question of sanctity to such a point that the place is stuck in the very same age that the British left it. That shouldn't be the approach, according to me, as far as development is concerned or even culture is concerned.
Sanjay Nirupam ji, क्या हमारे तीर्थ स्थलों का, धार्मिक स्थलों का ये जो जीर्णोद्धार इस समय कहा जा रहा है, हो रहा है, चाहे एक भव्य राम मंदिर बनाने की बात हो, या फिर केदारनाथ धाम का मार्ग बनाना हो, या फिर काशी कॉरिडोर हो, या महाकाल लोक हो, क्या ये राजनीति है या एक बड़ा सिविलाइजेशनल चेंज लाने का प्रयास हो रहा है?
नहीं, सिविलाइजेशनल चेंज जैसा तो कुछ मैं नहीं मान सकता। निश्चित तौर पर इन मंदिरों का विकास होना चाहिए, चाहे काशी कॉरिडोर हो या उज्जैन का महाकाल कॉरिडोर हो या फिर भव्य राम मंदिर बनाने की बात है, बिल्कुल इसका समर्थन है, इसके खिलाफ कोई नहीं है। लेकिन कल्पना करिए 1947 के बाद जब नेहरू जी जब प्रधानमंत्री बने और जब उन्होंने भी ये सोचा होता कि चलो चुपचाप टोटल फोकस करते हैं मंदिरों के विकास पे, तो कभी आप सैटेलाइट बना सकते थे, कभी आप रॉकेट बना सकते थे, कभी आप मंगल पे भेज सकते थे अपना सैटेलाइट, कभी चंद्रयान भेज सकते थे। तो उन्होंने एक साइंटिफिक टेम्पर की बात की। साइंटिफिक टेम्पर मतलब कॉलोनियल माइंडसेट नहीं हुआ, साइंटिफिक टेम्पर मतलब एक प्रोग्रेसिव अप्रोच हुआ। बट नेहरू जी वाज नेवर अगेंस्ट एनी टेम्पल, नेहरू जी नेवर ऑर्डर्ड पुलिस टू डिमोलिश टेम्पल। तो अपनी अपनी प्रायोरिटी होती है, तो ये सरकार की अगर प्रायोरिटी है तो हम इसका विरोध नहीं कर रहे हैं, लेकिन इसके साथ साथ एम्स तो नेहरू जी ने बना के दिया आपको, उस एम्स का जितना विस्तार कर सकते हैं करिए, हम इसका स्वागत करेंगे। जितने हॉस्पिटल, जितने स्कूल बनाना चाहे बनाइए आप, जितने रोड बनाना चाहे बनाइए, जितने पुल बनाना चाहिए बनाइए, वर्ल्ड क्लास पुल बना के दीजिए आप हमको, अच्छे रेलवे बना के दीजिए हमको। अंग्रेजों ने हमको ट्रेन दिया। अब जो बार बार मानसिक दास्ता की बात होती है, मैं एक दो बात इसमें जोड़ना चाहता हूं। पूरा जो सिविलाइजेशन डेवलप होता है ना, वो एक बहुत लंबा प्रोसेस होता है। ये लोग दोनों लोग हिस्टोरियन है, लोग बता सकते हैं, एक दिन में नहीं बनता कुछ। और जब एक सिविलाइजेशन का जब डेवलपमेंट होता है, जब सभ्यता का विकास होता है, तो बहुत सारी चीजें आती जाती हैं, उसको हम एब्जॉर्ब करते रहते हैं। अब आप जब कहेंगे कि नहीं मानसिक दास्ता से बाहर निकलना है, तो जो बाहर से आई हुई चीजें उसको बाहर निकाल दो। संभव है? समोसा हमारा नहीं है, निकाल देंगे हम। चिकन करी पूरी दुनिया में दूसरे नंबर का सबसे मशहूर भोजन है, उसको निकाल देंगे क्या? वो हमारा नहीं है, मुगल लेके आए।
नहीं, लेकिन एक तरफ हम बात कर रहे हैं योग की,
इम्बाइब किया है। That has become a part of Indian civilization. That was never existed in Harappan civilization. या वैदिक पीरियड में भी नहीं था, लेकिन आज वो इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन का एक हिस्सा है। उसको ये नहीं कह सकते कि मुगल दास्ता का एक प्रतीक है, इसको निकाल के बाहर फेंक दो। आप इंडिया गेट तोड़ नहीं सकते, आप गेट ऑफ इंडिया तोड़ नहीं सकते, हालांकि वो एक अंग्रेज राजा के सम्मान में बनाया गया था।
साई आपको फिर उत्तर देना चाहते हैं, क्योंकि एक तरफ बात हो रही है योग को, जो भारत की देन है पूरी विश्व को, उसको और फैलाया जाए।
मैं सुन नहीं पा रहा हूं बहुत ज्यादा, या तो पता नहीं।
My response to
Sai wants to respond.
Yeah, my response to
listen to him.
my response to I think there's a lot of echo. That's why.
थोड़ा सा
I think one of the things that Mr. Sanjay Nirupam will have to consider is, in stark contrast to the confidence with which the current dispensation is embracing its civilization, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru had a serious problem with the reopening of the Somnath temple. That is a question that needs to be addressed. On the one hand, Dr. Menon says that we must respect our past, but it seems that in our own heads we have certain cutoff points. Until what point can the past be respected? If it happens to be until the Mughal past, it is certainly worthy of discussion. But if there is a discussion with respect to the pre-colonial, pre-Mughal, pre-Islamic period of Bharat, that discussion effectively enters the realm of Hindutva for some weird reason. It's almost as if we are being told that thus far and no further, any discussion with respect to Bharat's history that speaks of a period which did not have a Christian presence or a Muslim presence is certainly not acceptable as far as Bharat's current public discourse is concerned, because somehow it militates the concept of secularism. Let me also make this point. When we speak of a civilization narrative forward and when we speak of a decolonial way forward, it does not speak of removal of certain episodes from Bharat's history. It actually says that the whitewashing and the distortion that these periods of history have been subjected to over the last 60, 70 years, it needs to be reset, and there needs to be a certain degree of balance as far as these discussions are concerned. But even then, when the discussion starts, you're being accused of saffronization because you're not allowed to present those facts. So it appears that our approach to past and civilization is particularly selective depending on the vichardhara or the ideological camps that we are all placed in. So these cutoff periods is what I think the discussion is on.
Professor Menon and Sanjay Nirupam wants to respond. Sanjay ji, बात ये हो रही है कि भारत का सदियों पुराना इतिहास है, हजारों वर्ष पुरानी हम सभ्यता है, विश्व की सबसे पुरानी सभ्यता जो अभी भी जीवित है और प्रगति कर रही है। हमारा इतिहास न केवल 200 साल अंग्रेजों का है, न उससे पहले 800 साल जो आतताई हमारे देश पर आते गए, आक्रमण करते गए, बन के यहां रह गए, कुछ चले गए, ऐसा इतिहास नहीं है। हम अपनी पुरानी सभ्यता पर बात करने से क्या घबराते हैं?
नहीं, कभी नहीं घबराते, और घबराना भी नहीं चाहिए। हम 5000 साल पुरानी सिविलाइजेशन के हिस्सा हैं, हमारे लिए गर्व की बात है। लेकिन कुछ लोग हैं जो बार बार एक डर का माहौल पैदा कर रहे हैं कि साहब हम खतरे में हैं, हम बर्बाद, अरे यहां शक आए, कुषाण आए, हूण आए, टर्क्स आए, पूरा आप स्लेव जो डायनेस्टी का राज चला इंडिया के ऊपर, मुगल्स आए, उससे पहले लोधी आए थे, उसके बाद अंग्रेज आए, हिंदू धर्म का तो कुछ नहीं हुआ।
नहीं, लेकिन हमारा इतिहास उससे और पुराना है।
पहली बार पूरी दुनिया में एक ऐसा देश है जहां मेजॉरिटी के लोग कहते हैं कि मेजॉरिटी खतरे में है। आमतौर पर माइनॉरिटी खतरे में होता है हर जगह। 5000 साल में हिंदू धर्म का कुछ नहीं बिगड़ा, अब क्या बिगड़ेगा? आगे भी कभी नहीं बिगड़ेगा, क्योंकि हमारा सिविलाइजेशन इतना डीप रूटेड है, वो कभी उसको कोई उखाड़ ही नहीं सकता। हम अपने जड़ों तक जा सकते हैं, लेकिन उन जड़ों को उखाड़ने के चक्कर में
नहीं, क्या जड़ों को और मजबूत करने की आवश्यकता है? यही तो बात इस समय
बहुत अच्छी बात है। जड़ों को मजबूत
कमेंट
करने के लिए हिंदी लैंग्वेज है, सारी रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस हैं, संस्कृत है, लेकिन अब कहेंगे कि नहीं, हिंदी और मराठी, गुजराती सब छोड़ के चलो वापस संस्कृत में। अब पाणिनि ने तो संस्कृत के बहुत सारे फार्मूलाज लिखे हुए हैं, क्या जरूरी है कि आज हम पढ़ करके उनके जरिए चले? हाँ, पुष्पक विमान पे में गर्व होता है, लेकिन क्या उस टेक्नोलॉजी के जरिए हम कोई विमान बना सकते हैं आज?
अब पढ़ेंगे तो जानेंगे, लेकिन ओके, प्रोफेसर मेनन, you wanted to come in, sir.
I think the discussion was on not abstract but the physical. If we talk about development, the question I want to ask is modernity a Western tradition? Can we imagine modernity to be evolved from our own roots? That is the crux of the problem. So, of course, no one is ashamed of our past, but we are not able to develop a modernity that's based on our past. We are always trying to appropriate someone else's modernity and make it Indian. It's just like, if I might make a very crass example, get a Western woman, make her wear a sari and say she's Indian. That's what we are doing to our cities. Our cities are ancient cities, are historic cities. We garb it in a Western garb and call it modern. Absurd, you know. Why can't we develop a modernity that evolves from, shall we say, the Varanasi traditions? Why do we have to break it down and make it something like, you know, really a mall, a modern mall?
Okay.
And then call it a modern Banaras.
But, you know, aren't we going back to our roots, Sai, which actually predates both the British and the invaders? We are going back. Is that what you? Is that your point in decolonization?
No one is saying going back.
Not at all. Not at
No
all.
one is
And I think on this particular point, I certainly agree with Dr. Menon. But before that, let me just express my disagreement with Mr. Sanjay Nirupam in the first place, because he seems to be making the point that a majority, by sheer virtue of being in a greater numerical, let's say, proportion, so to speak, in the population, loses the right to call itself a victim altogether. Going by this logic, practically every colonized society must give up the right of being a victim, because even if you look at South Africa, the Africans were supposed to be in larger number. The ones who were ruling them, the whites, were in smaller number. Even as far as India is concerned, what was the population of the British when they left this country at the peak of their powers? It was not more than 1 million. And we were still 30 crores when they left this particular country. Does this mean that we never suffered colonization at all? So I don't think it's a question of numbers. If you look at global history, the fact of the matter is, it's not numbers that ultimately makes a difference, but it is intent and concerted effort that gives you access to power. Otherwise, going by that particular logic, shall we apply the very same logic to the caste discussion in this country? And the communities that are constantly accused of actually wielding power are always the micro-minority, regardless of whichever phase of history you're looking at. So how does that particular logic play itself out in the caste equation? That's point number one. Point number two, the agreement that I have with Dr. Menon is complete as far as the point that he has just made. Literature on the subject clearly tells you that modernity has been equated with westernization for the better part of the world's history. It is only after all these formerly colonized societies have started asserting themselves and have started regaining access to their own roots that modernity has started acquiring a certain hybrid shape, because now the definition of modernity is not dictated from one side of the Atlantic, and it's not dictated by one particular community, so to speak. More people have started contributing to it. The one thing that India, whenever we speak of decolonization, never looks at, the one direction that we never look at, and that's perhaps the most important direction we should be looking at, is that the voices which are asking for a decolonial access to the past are actually African in nature and Latin American in nature. We constantly seem to be looking at the West and Europe when it comes to decolonization. You're looking at the colonizer's territory to understand what is decolonization, as opposed to looking at former colonies to see what is it that they're doing right.
Okay. And I'm still wondering if that process is still on and if there is resistance to that process. We've run out of time on this part of the discussion, but for joining me here, gentlemen, many thanks.
Thank you.